And bringing up the socialist rear, it's Bernie Sanders by a nose, edging out some of the other leading candidates for the Democratic nomination. I'm Scott Ott, and this episode of Right Angles brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. I'm here with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. And gentlemen, Bernie Sanders is starting to rack up some polling victories anyway. Things are looking good for him in Iowa. Things are looking good for him in New Hampshire. And then this morning I saw a headline that he had won a poll in California. That doesn't mean he's going to win in every state, but he's certainly doing better than one might have expected given the difficulty of the field that he is in the contest with. And by that, I don't mean necessarily that they're great candidates, but just, Joe Biden's got a natural edge because of who he is and where he's been. And Elizabeth Sanders is like a Bernie Sanders. Did I say Elizabeth Sanders again?
We know what you meant.
Every episode. But Elizabeth Warren is kind of like a slightly younger, slightly more attractive. Never mind. It's not working. Okay. So in any case, Jonathan Chait has a piece in New York Magazine where he says the idea of nominating Bernie Sanders for the Democratic presidential nomination would be insane. And let me just read this passage for you. And Steve, I'll float this to you first. This is why it's insane. Sanders has gleefully discarded the party's conventional wisdom that it has to pick and choose where to push public opinion leftward, adopting a comprehensive left-wing agenda, some of which is popular and some of which is decidedly not. Positions in the latter category include replacing all private health insurance with a government plan, banning fracking, letting prisoners vote, decriminalizing the border, giving free health care to undocumented immigrants, and eliminating ICE. Now, he acknowledges, Chait does, that he's being selective about that list, but he's saying, this is the bad stuff, and this is what we need to be concerned about. Steve, does that sound to you like an insane choice for the Democratic Party, or does that sound like it's right down Main Street for them?
Well, I appreciate the honesty, if nothing else. Sanders is just, he is exactly what he is, and he's going to keep doing that, the old Bolshevik. Before I really get to your question, what I'd like to talk about is this tacit admission in Jonathan Chait's column that I really appreciate. He comes almost right out and says that there's no limiting principle to the Democratic Party's leftism. It's not a matter of these things are good or bad. It's a matter of when is it an opportune moment to push public opinion in these directions we're already headed. He doesn't say these things are bad or wrong. He says they're unpopular. This is a huge tell. And sort of like my idea last week of getting Hillary really drunk after the election on a box or two of Chardonnay and hearing the dirt she would have to dish on her fellow Democrats and even Republicans. I would love to get an honest answer from Democrats on, well, okay, what government is enough? Where do you draw the line? Where do you say here and no further? And there isn't one. I remember a few years ago, some fairly snarky radio host got one of these Democratic contenders on an interview and sort of jokingly floated the idea of national car insurance on top of national health insurance. Oh, I never thought of that before. It might not be a bad idea. I think it might have been Dick Durbin, come to think of it. That guy's a moron. He's just a thumbsucker. Anyway, back to your question, which was what again? I got lost in my own.
I'll just say, do you think Chait is right that Bernie has really gone too far to the left, or do you think the Democrats are ready for this?
Well, we're going to find out starting in Iowa here next week, aren't we? It's February 3rd. I think that's Monday or Tuesday. We're going to find out real soon. I don't want to get too much into the nuts and bolts of the politics here, but something was really interesting. I mentioned in my segment about Joe Biden that California and Iowa couldn't be more different. Iowa is very much grassroots in its primary. 99 counties, most of them are fairly sparsely populated, and candidates go to every single one of them and do the show up at the diner, shake the hands, kiss the baby, all the real grassroots stuff. California, the market is huge. You've got 39 million people in California right now. There's simply no space for retail politicking like you do in Iowa or New Hampshire, or even to a degree in South Carolina. What you do is you buy ads a lot of ads in one of the world's most expensive TV markets. It's just absolutely punishing. And right now you've got Michael Bloomberg and Tom Steyer, a couple of billionaires, basically sucking all the oxygen out of the airwaves by buying up all of this ad time in California. Bill, I can't tell you how sorry I feel for you right now. You probably can't turn on a TV or your radio or look at a billboard or do anything without seeing Tom or Mike trying to sell you on their big progressive platforms.
Well, you know how much contempt I used to have for Bloomberg, but now having seen 7,000 ads, I've decided to vote for him.
Oh, yes. Out of spite. What I'm wondering is are these guys sucking so much oxygen out of the room that it doesn't turn the Democrats any further left in the nominating process, but does it pave the way for Bernie Sanders to take the nomination because he's the least annoying guy out there, which is really saying something.
Bill, if Bernie Sanders is the least annoying guy out there, then you have really found yourself quite a field.
I think Steve just means that he can't afford as many ads to annoy you to death. So, Bill, there's two cases being made within the Democratic Party, and this happens, quadrennially. Number one is that we have to nominate somebody who's kind of close to the center politically, because America is a centrist country, not as far left as our progressive base that's pushing us constantly during the primaries. And so therefore, we should nominate someone like a Joe Biden. Then there's the other part of the party that's not just the extremists, but some people are saying, you know what? If we don't present a clear alternative to the Republicans, then people won't vote based on a clear choice. And they'll just look at it and go, oh, why bother? President Trump's got a tailwind. He's going to win this thing. It's starting to look like it's not craziness to suggest that Bernie Sanders could be the Democratic nominee. And in fact, back in 2016, may have been the Democratic nominee if it weren't for all the people that Hillary Clinton already owned who controlled that process. How do you think this affects the Trump campaign calculus if they're looking at a fall campaign against a Bernie Sanders versus a Joe Biden?
Well, I don't know if this happens quadrennially. Mostly, as far as I can tell, just happens every 4 years.
Well, that too.
The question is. The question is, what is the depth of his support? And then you've got a couple of other sort of quadrilateral, did you say, events that happen every 4 years? And here's one of them. One of them is the idea that it's his turn. I'm not talking about Bernie now. I'm talking about Biden. It's McCain's turn. It's it's Bob Dole's turn. It's their turn, and they may not be the best candidate out there. They may in fact be a terrible candidate, but it's their turn. And when I see their turn kind of candidacies, and I'm talking about McCain and Dole here, it's almost understood from the beginning that we're not going to win this thing. At least that's the attitude of the campaign. There's a real sense that, this is what we're going to do. And by God, Bob's earned it, or John's earned it, and he's going to get his shot. And we saw this in 2008 where Sarah Palin wanted to continue to fight and McCain, no, we can't win there. I don't want to get in the way of the first black president, which you might have wanted to tell us before you became the nominee. So there's that kind of thing. There's also the enthusiasm factor. I knew that was going to happen. Oh, no. There's no question that Bernie is generating the highest enthusiasm of anybody in the Democratic field right now. And in an election where you think you're probably going to lose, certainly going to lose the middle, I think probably the one thing you're trying to buy is enough enthusiasm to somehow make up for this, just enough to just kind of push this thing through just on a wave. I don't think Joe Biden's going to be creating any waves of intense passion. And then I think the final thing that they're probably thinking about when it comes to Bernie is, despite his unlikeliness, which I will be addressing in my right angle this week, they can certainly look at a recent example of an unlikely candidate who was told from the beginning had no chance whatsoever, absolutely none. It could never possibly happen that somebody that far outside of the party mechanics could become the nominee, let alone the president. And we watched Donald Trump beat them one by one until there was nobody left. Yeah. He was just the man of the times. I suspect that if all you have in the middle in terms of the Elizabeth Warren or the Joe Biden thing is this is the only guy who can beat Trump, that's not something that really gets you fired up. The Bernie people are fired up, and they may think that, look, if we have any chance to win, it's by throwing the long bomb. And even if we don't win, at least we managed to say we nominated a socialist in the same way that, you get to say, well, we nominated the first woman vice president or the first, all of this drivel. That said, I think it's going to take a remarkable set of circumstances for that to happen. And that's something I'm going to outline in my episode.
Well, there certainly is an entrenched party machine, frankly, in both parties that work very hard to ensure that people too far outside the bounds of what they would consider their party propriety don't get a chance to do this. But Bernie Sanders has done a number of things consistently well. One is to generate small dollar donations from large numbers of people. Now, what most people don't realize is that Donald Trump generated more small dollar donations than Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders combined last time around. But among Democrats, Bernie has certainly been effective at that and made a great deal of that. The other thing that Bernie has done that I think no other candidate really has behind them right now is the sense that he's part of a movement. That there's something that is happening that is bigger than all of us. And I am just a spokesman for that movement. The tide of history is turning, and I want you to be with me. And some of the indication you can see in that is the support that he's garnered from the young, even people like a rookie Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez coming alongside of him and doing a lot of stumping on the campaign trail for him. He has managed to fire the sense of idealism that is typically reserved for the young, but which he is, I think, expert at being able to convey. Now, no matter what you think of his policies, and I think very little of them, and I think they're very bad, but you've got to acknowledge that he's effective at some things. And the key to winning an election is turning out the vote on election day. So it really has more to do with the ground operation than anything. The parties themselves generate much of that ground organization. However, we've seen, even with the Republican Party's great ground game, it can't do a GOTV effort, the get out the vote effort, if it's got a candidate who doesn't fire the passions of the rank and file voters and doesn't bring new people into that process. As Bill has often said, Donald Trump surprised everybody by winning because they were only polling likely voters, and Donald Trump attracted unlikely voters. I think Bernie Sanders in many ways is doing the same thing. And frankly, I think it would be a much more lively and useful contest in the fall to see Bernie Sanders go up against Donald Trump, because I like the clear delineation of the ideology, to be able to say, look, we are not just voting for Coke or Pepsi here, one slightly sweeter than the other. We are voting for the future of this country. Which way do you want to see this future go? And frankly, I'd like to know which way the rest of the country wants to go, so I can figure out where those valleys are, where you can get that invisible dome over top of it that makes it look like there's nothing down there.
Scott's going to go golf.
In any case, I think that there is great value in making that clear contrast. And so I wouldn't trifle with the idea that Bernie Sanders could actually win this if he keeps going in the movement stream that he's going right now. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.